Gone with the Windy Pops by Lilli McCullagh. Tucked into the folds of the heathery Lammermuir Hills lay a tiny settlement full of kind and friendly folk. Most treasured of all was the warm-hearted Mr. Beck, who worked tirelessly for the community, running the local cafe, cinema club, newsletter, and pretty much anything else anyone needed help with. Mr. Beck lived next door to the village primary school. He loved to hear the children play, listen to their stories, and see their artwork, which he often displayed in the cafe. He didn't even mind when the children accidentally kicked balls into his garden. All was well in the neighbourhood until one day, like a dark cloud overhead, Mr. and Mrs. Glump arrived, taking up residence in the heart of the village. As everyone soon discovered, the grisly pair were not good or kind people. They were loathsome and vile. So vile that they seemed to infect everything they touched, like a contagious disease. Their garden, once bright and full of life, was now overgrown and littered with junk. The bluebells, tulips and roses that once stood proud in the flower beds were now shrivelled and faded to the colour of sea har. The humming bees and chirping wildlife were heard no more. Even their house became misshapen and crooked, like an ancient haunted house. Misery hung over them like a velvet curtain. The Glumps despised any signs of joy and happiness, especially from children. Their faces soured like they were sucking lemons every time they heard the delightful squeals of a child, or the excited barks of their neighbour's dog as it chased a ball. Hammering at their window and wailing, "Be quiet!" they would shake their gnarly, twisted fists at innocent passers-by, ordering them to move on. Soon enough, the village fell into a lonely silence, as everyone tried to avoid the spiteful, cold-hearted Glumps. The villagers no longer ventured out of their houses, and even the school closed its doors and sent the children home to learn. Mr. Beck greatly missed seeing his neighbours, and saying hello to the children over his garden wall. But most of all he worried about those alone and isolated in the rural hamlet, so he set about delivering meals and company to those in need, ignoring the Glumps' frowns and venomous stares as he went on his way. Then, one cold, murky evening, as Mr. Beck was returning from his soup run, he overheard the Glumps' bitter voices. They were devising a plan so evil it made his blood run cold. A plot to trick the children, filling sweets with yeast and soap and hydrogen peroxide, to blow them up in one gigantic, foamy, clean sweep, ridding the village of children forever. Mr. Beck had heard enough. He dashed home and set about making his own plan. Early the next morning, Mr. Beck visited Miss Pearson, the very knowledgeable schoolteacher, who also loved nothing more than science and problem-solving. She was the perfect accomplice. Miss Pearson cracked it immediately. "Elephant toothpaste! The children eat the sweets, the components mix in their bellies, and boom! Off they will pop in a gassy explosion. The yeast," Miss Pearson explained, "is crucial. It's the catalyst. No yeast, no explosion." Mr. Beck knew what to do next. It was very simple, but very clever. He would swap the Glumps' yeast for brown sugar, which looked similar, and Mr. Beck had mounds of it in his kitchen. That night, under the cover of darkness, Mr. Beck peered up at the towering garden wall the Glumps had erected to keep life out. He doubted his stiff aging legs would be flexible enough to make it over the wall, and a bead of sweat formed on his forehead as he thought about breaking into the Glumps' house. He couldn't go through with it, but he wasn't ready to give in just yet. He slinked across to Milly's house and knocked gingerly on the blue front door, crossing his fingers that her parents didn't answer. Rotten luck, it was her dad. Mr. Beck cleared his throat and, wearing his most convincing smile, politely asked if Milly, who would usually be found up a tree, could possibly be let out to help him with a quick errand. Milly's dad paused for a moment, captivated by the sight of a high-standing member of the community clad head to toe in black and wearing a balaclava. But it was a tight-knit kind of a place where everyone did their bit. So he said yes. Bursting with ecstatic energy, Milly, who had been eavesdropping from her bedroom window, flew out the door faster than a shooting star, hauling Mr. Beck by the arm back to the Glumps' house. Like a rat up a drainpipe, Milly scampered up and over the wall, skillfully picked the Glumps' lock, completed the swap, and was back on the other side of the wall with the yeast in one hand and a fistful of fizzy cola bottles in the other before Mr. Beck had even had time to put his head torch on. Mr. Beck breathed a heavy sigh of relief. But he had one more trick up his sleeve. The next day was Sunday, and Mr. Beck knew the Glumps would come into the small shop where he worked for their papers, milk, and breakfast rolls, so he thought he'd give them a taste of their own medicine. The Glumps left the shop looking rather pleased with themselves, unaware their evil plan had been foiled, and that their breakfast was going to be served with a big dollop of just desserts. The villagers looked up in wonder when they heard the belch-like explosion, but no one ever questioned what happened to the Glumps, who were never seen again. Like a newly tuned violin, harmony returned to the village. Children's chatter filled classrooms and playgrounds, the church congregation gathered, and friends and neighbours were able to meet again. In memory of Mr. Beck, our hero.